Is McLaren really the team to beat in 2025? What happened in Bahrain left the paddock speechless. But before I tell you the details, let me know in the comments if you think McLaren can win the championship this year. Because what they discovered in these tests could change everything. Are we facing McLaren's most dominant season since 1998? What the MCL39 showed in Bahrain was much more than a simple surprise. During the 3 days of testing, McLaren was not only fast at specific moments, but it consolidated itself as the most consistent and solid team in all the race simulations. That is key because, unlike an isolated fast lap, the long runs are the ones that really anticipate what will happen in a real Grand Prix. Lando Norris completed a full race simulation and his lap times were so consistent that, on average, he was half a second per lap faster than his direct rivals. If we translate that gap over a full race distance, we're talking about a lead of over 30 seconds across the finish line. In a sport where gaps are often measured in tenths, half a second is staggering. Oscar Piastri also put in an impressive performance, albeit with a different pattern. In his race simulation, he was 0.2 seconds per lap faster than George Russell. That represents a final lead of around 10 seconds at the end of a Grand Prix. What's more interesting, however, is how that lead was distributed. During the first stint, Piastri was half a second per lap ahead of Russell, but in the subsequent stints, that gap narrowed considerably, down to just 0.05 seconds per lap. This indicates that McLaren not only has pure speed, but that the MCL39 is also capable of managing the tires very efficiently at the start, when the car is heavier, and remaining competitive as the race progresses. However, there is one detail that makes this dominance even more striking. The Bahrain International Circuit has not historically been one of McLaren's strong points. It is a track where slow corners and traction zones have been a headache for the British team in previous years. However, the MCL39 seems to have broken that pattern. Part of the explanation could be the unusual weather conditions of the test, with cooler than usual temperatures and a constant wind that altered the aerodynamic behavior of all the cars. Andrea Stella, team principal, acknowledged that those specific conditions could have masked some of the car's traditional weaknesses in these types of corners, but at the same time, it is clear that McLaren has managed to build a much more complete car. An additional fact that reflects the quality of this new car is how it behaved in different types of corners. In the medium-speed corners, the MCL39 was simply untouchable, making a difference especially in the middle section of the circuit, where braking stability and the aerodynamic efficiency of the front end set the tone. In these areas, Norris and Piastri were able to gain up to half a second per lap on Mercedes and Ferrari, an advantage that has rarely been seen in pre-season. What is most striking is that this superiority did not only occur in qualifying simulation conditions with low fuel, where it is easier to disguise performance. What really caught the attention is that McLaren was able to replicate this dominant performance in long runs, with realistic fuel loads and used tires. In this context, the MCL39 showed no significant signs of degradation and maintained a consistency that none of its rivals could match. In short, what the MCL39 showed in Bahrain was not a fluke or an isolated mirage. It was a top-level technical and strategic display, a statement of intent that made it clear that McLaren is not going into 2025 as just another contender, but as a serious contender for the title, with a fast, balanced car capable of making a real difference in the most demanding race conditions. The secret of the MCL39 is not a single magical change, but the result of a very well-executed technical evolution based on the lessons learned during 2023 and the intense aerodynamic work carried out in the winter. What really sets this car apart from its predecessor is the remarkable aerodynamic efficiency that McLaren has achieved, especially in the front end, a key area in the general behavior of any Formula One car. In simple terms, the front end is responsible for initiating the car's turn when the driver turns the steering wheel. If the car does not respond well in that first phase of the corner, everything that comes after is compromised. Stability, traction, and even tire management. McLaren detected in 2023 that one of its biggest weaknesses was inconsistency in this first phase of the corner, especially in slow and medium-speed corners. Without a solid front end, drivers had to constantly adjust their driving style, which led to uneven tire wear and a loss of confidence when pushing the limits of the car. For 2025, McLaren focused on turning this weakness into a strength. They did this by redesigning the aerodynamic flow around the front suspension and fine-tuning the interaction between the front wing and the floor. That work not only improved the MCL39's ability to bite into the tarmac on corner entry, but also reduced downforce variations when the car goes over camber changes or irregularities in the tarmac. This technical change may sound complex, but it translates into something very easy to understand from the cockpit. When Norris and Piastri turn the wheel, the car responds immediately, precisely and without surprises. That confidence allows both drivers to attack the corner from a greater distance and at a higher speed, gaining time in the process. In stopwatch terms, this fine work on the front end is directly responsible for the gains of between 2 and 3 tenths per lap that Mclaren showed in medium corner sectors during the Bahrain test. But the front end is only part of the story. The MCL39 also shows a clear improvement in overall downforce efficiency. The car generates more downforce without paying as high a price in terms of drag. Simply put, it is a car that sticks to the ground better in corners, but is still quick on the straights. This balance is very difficult to achieve because normally when a team goes for more downforce, the car becomes slower on the straights. However, McLaren seems to have found a sweet spot between the two. This well-achieved aerodynamic balance explains why the MCL39 was so strong in race simulations. With more payload, the car remains predictable, making it easier for Norris and Piastri to better manage their tires. Also, by not having to correct as much in corners, the drivers can be gentler with the steering wheel and throttle, reducing wear on the rear tires, which are critical on abrasive circuits like Bahrain. All this is even more impressive considering that McLaren has achieved these improvements without significantly compromising its top speed. In Bahrain, the MCL39 was consistently one of the fastest cars on the straight, which is a clear sign that the aerodynamic work not only improved grip, but also optimized the overall efficiency of the package. Another key aspect is that McLaren not only worked on improving pure performance, but also on widening the operating window of the car. In practical terms, this means that the MCL39 is easier to tune to suit different track conditions, wind or temperature. In Bahrain, McLaren was one of the few teams that did not show significant drops in performance when conditions changed, a sign that the car has a solid and adaptable aerodynamic base, which is crucial for a long championship like the one in 2025. In short, the secret of the MCL39 is a combination of more efficient aerodynamics, a more precise front end and a more stable mechanical and aerodynamic platform. That combination not only improves pure pace, but makes life easier for the drivers and expands the team's strategic options. If this performance is confirmed in the first few races, McLaren will not only be fighting for victories, but will have built a winning platform capable of sustaining itself throughout the season, something they have not achieved since the late 1990s. With these ingredients, McLaren has not only created a fast car, it has created a smart car, and that could be the real key to its success in 2025. The big question after any surprising preseason is whether that level shown in testing is sustainable during the season, especially on a calendar as long and varied as that of Formula One in 2025. In the case of McLaren, there are reasons to believe that it is, but there are also risk factors that can play against it once the real competition begins. To begin with, it is essential to understand that McLaren's performance in Bahrain was not the result of a single isolated element. The MCL39 showed pure speed in short runs, outstanding consistency in race simulations, solid behavior in tire management and an aerodynamic platform that seems to adapt well to different conditions. That combination of factors is what really allows us to think that McLaren can sustain this level beyond a specific circuit. However, there are important nuances. Bahrain, despite being a fairly representative track in terms of combined braking, traction and degradation demands, is not a circuit that summarizes all the variables of the calendar. A car's behavior can change radically depending on factors such as the temperature of the asphalt, the type of corners that predominate, the altitude or even the evolution of the track over the course of a Grand Prix weekend. In 2023, for example, McLaren had a car that was very competitive on high downforce circuits such as Suzuka or Silverstone, but suffered on tracks where mechanical traction and slow corners were key, such as Monaco or Hungary. While the MCL39 is clearly an improved evolution, there is still no solid evidence that those old weaknesses have been completely eliminated. Another key factor is the temperature. In Bahrain, the conditions were unusually cool for a preseason test. That lower temperature helped McLaren to better manage the tires, especially the rear ones, which are the most critical on that circuit. However, the reality of the season is that McLaren will face much hotter circuits, such as Jeddah, Singapore, or even Miami. In those conditions, the tire's operating window is narrower, and any small imbalance in aerodynamic balance or mechanical setup is magnified. If the MCL39 is a car that needs a very specific operating window to perform at its best, McLaren could face much more difficult weekends when conditions are not ideal. Another relevant point is the technical development during the season. What McLaren showed in Bahrain was a car in its initial specification, designed with a clear focus on learning from the strengths and weaknesses of the 2023 car. However, the pace of development in Formula One is relentless. Teams like Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes are known for their ability to bring significant improvements with each update. If McLaren fails to maintain that pace of evolution, it could start the season very strongly and then be caught and even surpassed as the other teams fine-tune their concepts. In this sense, the budget cap plays a crucial role. McLaren, like the rest of the teams, is subject to the spending cap imposed by the FIA. That means they cannot spend indiscriminately to correct problems or develop every weekend. So the efficiency of their upgrades will be key. If McLaren manages to bring effective improvements without wasting resources, they will be able to sustain their initial performance. But if their first upgrades do not work as expected, they could find themselves in a difficult situation, especially if Red Bull or Ferrari find a key improvement that changes the technical hierarchy. There is also a strategic and operational factor that can affect the sustainability of this level. In pre-season, teams operate without the real pressure of a race weekend. There are no decisions to be made under the pressure of a qualifying session, nor do they have to react in real time to a rival strategy during the Grand Prix. In this more controlled context, it is easier to extract the maximum potential from a new car. When the races start, other factors come into play such as real-time decision-making, the execution of pit stops, or strategic management against direct rivals. In 2023 and 2024, McLaren showed clear progress in this regard, but they are still untested as a team under the pressure of consistently challenging for wins every weekend. That new pressure is something that can affect even the most experienced teams, and McLaren will need to prove it can sustain that level of execution when every 10th counts. Finally, there is a psychological and leadership issue that cannot be ignored. After years of struggling to get back to the top, McLaren has built a very positive environment around its progress. But the pressure of arriving as favorites in Melbourne is completely different to being the pleasant surprise of the midfield. How both Andrea Stella and the drivers manage that pressure will be fundamental. Lando Norris, although very talented, has never been in a situation where he is expected to challenge for the title from the first race. Oscar Piastri, although he showed maturity in his first full year, will also have to adapt to a more demanding role, especially if McLaren is to fight in both the drivers' and constructors' classifications. In summary, McLaren has technical, operational, and strategic reasons to believe that it can sustain the level shown in Bahrain, but to do so they will need to demonstrate three things. First, that the McL39 can adapt well to very different circuits and conditions. Second, that the team is capable of bringing effective improvements without wasting budget. And third, that drivers, engineers, and strategists can operate with the same efficiency under the real pressure of a championship where every decision can define a title. If they manage to meet those three requirements, McLaren will not only be able to maintain this level, but will have solid arguments to fight for its first championship since 1998. If they fail on any of these fronts, what they showed in Bahrain could remain as a great pre-season illusion and nothing more. It is in that delicate balance between potential and execution that McLaren's true destiny in 2025 will be defined. With what McLaren showed during the 3 days of testing in Bahrain, it is inevitable to wonder if we are at the beginning of one of the most successful seasons in its recent history. What until recently seemed like a long-term reconstruction, now begins to look like a true rebirth. The McL39's long-run pace left no doubts, and the consistency shown by Norris and Piastri confirmed that McLaren did not come to Bahrain just looking for headlines. They made a statement of intent for the entire grid. If that performance carries over to Melbourne, McLaren will have a real chance to win the first race of the season and, more importantly, to position itself as the technical and strategic benchmark in this first stretch of the calendar. Since 1998, McLaren has not been the dominant team in Formula One, and now, 27 years later, they have the opportunity to change that narrative and rewrite their modern history. What is most interesting is that the context of 2025 is the perfect setting for McLaren to capitalize on this initial advantage. Red Bull arrives shrouded in doubt, especially after a test where its program was more discreet than usual. Ferrari continues to adapt to the arrival of Hamilton and the redesign of its technical concept. Mercedes, although it showed progress, is still in the process of rebuilding. Amidst this uncertain landscape, McLaren is the only team that seems to have found a clear and defined line, a solid path that connects the learning of 2023 and 2024 with impeccable execution in 2025. This does not mean that the championship is decided by any means. Formula One is a sport where technical evolution is constant, and what happens in pre-season does not always reflect what happens in the first Grand Prix or at the end of the year. However, there is something that is impossible to ignore. In these 3 days of testing, McLaren not only showed speed and consistency, it showed a team with conviction, with a clear concept and with drivers who feel comfortable and confident behind the wheel. What comes now is the real challenge: maintaining this level against rivals who are not going to sit idly by. Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes will adjust their cars, bring updates and exploit every small area of improvement they find. The key question is whether McLaren can maintain the pace of development necessary to defend this initial advantage. If you're following this season from now on, you'll want to pay close attention to what happens in Melbourne, because that first race will not only tell us whether McLaren can confirm its role as favorite, but it will also give us the first clues as to how its rivals will respond. And if you want to understand every technical detail, every key piece of data and every strategic decision that could define this fight, then it's time to join this community. Let me know in the comments if you think McLaren can sustain this level and if you think Norris or Piastri can become champions this year. And if you want to follow every chapter of this story, subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss the full analysis after each race. In the next video we will analyze why Ferrari believes it can turn this situation around and what role Lewis Hamilton will play in this attempt to come back. Because if one thing is clear, it is that this season has only just begun and every detail can make the difference between glory and frustration.